Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. The Holy Father just recently made a visit in Iraq. Iraq is for the most part what is referred to in the first reading, the region of the Chaldeans. So Chaldea, Babylon, and the many painful names that we read about in the Old Testament, they are all found in the region that is now known as Iraq and the borders of Iran, southeastern Turkey, and Syria. These are difficult places. But even if they are difficult places right now, you can be sure that if you read the Old Testament with attention, you would know that they were also difficult places for the people of God. Because that Babylon, the great whore referred to by the book of Revelation of Babylon, was where the people of God, the people of Israel, were thrown into exile. The first reading is a story as much of sinfulness and infidelity and turning one's back to the Lord as much as it is a story of redemption. Because the same Lord whom the people betrayed, God's very own chosen people, was the same one who raised Cyrus, the Emperor Cyrus, who in the year 538 BC issued an edict liberating the people of God and allowing them to go back to the temple that they have defiled, the temple that they have disrespected, the God whom they disobeyed, the God whom we disobey, the God whom we commit sin against repeatedly, is the same God of mercy and compassion. And it is all very clear in the first reading. The second and the third readings amplify a bit more the story of this God of mercy and compassion, because we hear the story of God's love. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, so that everyone who believes in Him might not perish. I'd like to focus on this short passage from John, on a line that we seldom think about. He came into the light to bring the light, but men preferred darkness to light. This is what we do. Every time we turn our backs to God, we prefer darkness into light. We are sore about the 10 o'clock at night curfew. We are sore about it. Why? Because what do we do during the night? What do we do during moments of darkness? It is the time when we do all sorts of things. And these things have nothing to do with the goodness that God so wants of us and gives us without us meriting them. Everyone who does wicked things hates the light. I have to start with the bad news of our lives as we live it now. Because who hates the light? Those who are doing evil. And therefore they take refuge in fake news. And our governments all over Southeast Asia are all ruled by a rogue country northwest of us, as they are ruling also the politics all over the African continent. All those who hate the light, they prefer darkness. We always prefer darkness. This is our tendency. As soon as Adam and Eve fell into sin, that is what we have been doing all along. And no one is an exemption. Even us priests and bishops and cardinals. And there is corruption too in the church that I love. There is corruption too in the Vatican, that Pope Francis is trying his best to banish, but men prefer darkness rather than light. But I cannot end this reflection if I remain on the level of bad news. And as a preacher, I need to give you both horizons. The horizon of man, sinful humanity. The fusion of horizons, this is what will save us. The horizon of sinful man, but the horizon of God. And the horizon of God is what we need, because we all now are surrounded by darkness, fake news, fake leaders. You cannot even believe World Health Organization, because they come out with conflicting reports. Every time I read something about the pandemic, I don't know whom to believe. Should I believe Fauci? Should I believe Dr. Salvania? Should I believe bloggers? Should I believe they're all scientists? And the problem of scotophobia is precisely this, scientifically induced doubt. And they use science in order to mislead you. And I'll give you an example of this scotophobic malady that is really fake news all over again. Once upon a time, they say if you eat eggs every day, you'll die soon because it's full of cholesterol. So they came up with another study that contradicts it, scotophobia, the science of inducing scientifically induced doubt. When you're in doubt, then you continue on going your merry way. If you are in doubt about whether or not our government is good, you continue on being fooled by government and by the WHO and by people in power and by people who have money. And therefore, even the major dailies, the so-called broadsheets, who believes them now? That's why they are dying, because nobody reads them anymore. Where do people get their news? From social media, and that is where all the fake news is. Men prefer darkness to light, and this is our problem. You see, if you go back to the story of the first reading, the problems of the people of Israel didn't come from God. The problems of the people of Israel are very clear in the first reading. They defiled the temple. They did every imaginable evil. They disobeyed. They were unfaithful. Oh no, God is not the author of your infidelity. God is not the author of our sinfulness. God is not the author of our fake elections. God is not the author of our racial slurs and our hatred for each other. God is not the author of the story about Imperial Manila and Kawawang Bisaya. There is no Kawawang Bisaya. When I was growing up, kawawa kami. Kasi Cavite. I came from Cavite. My neighbor, when we were newly transferred in Poblacion, Makati, asked me, "Toys, taga saan ka?" "Taga Cavite ho." Okay na sana yun eh. May dagdag pa eh. Ay, naku, sa Cavite. Maraming tulisan doon. I have never seen a tulisan in my life. I don't know what it is. And yet, how cruel we are. Ay, Bisdak. Ay, Caviteño. Batanggenyo. Maraming tulisan. I have never seen one in my life. God is not the author of all this. God is not the author of all this regionalism. God is not the author of division. God is a God of mercy and compassion. God is a God who calls us to life. For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, so that everyone who believes in Him might not perish. I am not fond of giving long homilies, but let me end with this little story. I read so many books. I got thousands of books, electronic and otherwise. But I was just reading a few months ago a book about death and dying. Nuts Kubler-Ross, pasay na po yan, luma na po yan. That's 40 years ago plus. I'm talking about modern findings of thanatology. And then he reports the story of a man who was told he had not much time to live anymore. And he was in the pre-departure area called ICU. And he was angry all the time. He was shouting at nurses all the time. He didn't want to talk with anybody. He didn't want to talk with his children. He didn't want to have anything to do with anybody because he was angry. Because it wasn't time yet to die. Because he just retired from work and he was as strong as a mule. Surely I shouldn't die yet. And he was angry. But then there came a day when the man became quiet and started talking gently, talking with compassion, talking with mercy, talking with understanding. Why? Because he has accepted the reality. Hindi niya na nilalabanan ang katotohanang siya ay may sakit at malapit ng lumisan. He accepted the reality. He embraced the cross. Mind you, my dear brothers and sisters, salvation eternal life does not begin with our death. Eternal life begins when you embrace the cross. When you accept the cross for what it is, a sign of a shameful, painful, ignominious death. We become saved when we accept the fact that we are surrounded by darkness. And because we are surrounded by fake news, fake leaders, and people who just take advantage of the poor, trillions of pesos borrowed for vaccination. Do you see it? Do you see vaccinations like in Canada where they can vaccinate Canadians 5 times over? We don't have it. We don't have it. We prefer darkness rather than light. We prefer the dark rather than the light. And this is who we are. Where is our salvation? Where is eternal life? Embrace the cross. Accept that reality that we live in a sinful world that needs God, that needs salvation. And when you accept the cross, then you can say, you can proclaim, for God so loved the world that He sent His only Son, so that everyone who believes in the cross and in Him who died on the cross might be saved through Him. Cheer up. You're surrounded by darkness, but there is light inside you that you can share with your children and grandchildren, in your house, in your neighborhood. Do it.